Hi, good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Nels Kloster. I'm a psychiatrist working in Southern Vermont.
And I'm Robert Stack. I'm a drug and alcohol counselor and a licensed mental health counselor. Good evening.
I think before we get started on taking new questions today, I'm not happy with one of the answers I gave last episode. One of our viewers had asked a question about Lamictal. Lamotrigine had been on that after being diagnosed as having bipolar disorder, and was asking how long should they be on that medication, but also the question of whether they should be engaged with a psychiatrist or not, since their family practice doctor was prescribing that. And I think so often the work we've done with traumatized people and with people with addiction, we've seen that label of bipolar disorder mistakenly applied to people who didn't sort of dig down and know what the whole story was about the mood fluctuations. And my answer, I think, was more akin to those sorts of people that we've worked with, and I think did a disservice to people who have sort of genuine bipolar disorder with those periods of mania and depression, sustain themselves for weeks at a time and occur, within a year or over the course of years. And I think someone that has had that sort of a cycle throughout the years of periods of mania that last for weeks, followed by severe depressions, that those are people that really should be under the care of a psychiatrist, even if it's not if the illness is in remission at the point in time. To be ready for the time when it goes through one of those cycles again, I think it's important to be engaged with a psychiatrist. And I think that, given that, I think my answer, I feel, was inadequate last week, and I wanted to correct that today.
There you go. There you go. Thank you.
And I mean, you were trying to get me to go in that direction.
That's all right.
Anyway, in a way, I missed your cue there.
I mean, part of it is that people tell you they can't get an appointment or they can't get in to see a psychiatrist. But I think, make an appointment, make a call. See a psychiatrist, call you up.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. And, it might take a couple months, but I mean, it's definitely worthwhile having a doctor know your history, know the medicines you're on, order the proper tests, and make sure everything's going correctly. So.
Right. It's a lifelong illness that has various cycles and it needs to be taken.
And then also you may want to engage some of these, very good therapists in town around some talk therapy. I mean, that was the other piece of that.
Right.
So, I'm a big fan of believing in that combination of psychopharmacology, but also talk therapy. Put those two together, and I think that's a good way to go.
Right.
Okay.
Good. Maybe we'll start with a new question then.
There we go.
So we have, my son just turned 21. He's recently been diagnosed as bipolar and has been prescribed Seroquel and Depakote. He had ADHD when he was younger, and I gave him his medication every day. Now that he's 21, he's stopped taking his meds, claiming he does not want to be classified with a mental illness and not be able to own a gun. How can we help him to understand that he needs to take his medication? Okay, well this sort of plays off a little bit from that previous question.
Yeah. And in hindsight, it's easy to sort of say, well, you could have done this or that. And I understand the problems with teenagers and taking their medicine, and especially something that was probably ADHD medicine. But I think one of the things that might have been helpful is that if he was taking his own medicine when he was growing up, instead of feeling that it was given to him, and as soon as he got 21, he said, well, I'm not going to take it anymore, because you can't make me take it.
Right.
And I think that's always the danger. Whenever you have coercive medication, or even probation, we find this sometimes with people in trouble with drugs and alcohol, the most dangerous month for relapse is the first month off probation. Even if they're doing well, even if they're going to meeting, doing everything they're supposed to do, it's just, I don't know if it's human nature or not. But, and I don't mean to pick on them. I mean, obviously you have a child, you want to make sure they take their medicine, but I'll let you talk a little bit more about that. But I think that's one of the things you look at.
Yeah, and this is like, I think like we mentioned before, there's a real appeal to being manic, or what we call sort of hypomanic, which is that state just leading up to that, feeling very good, feeling very energetic. And because of that, it takes many cycles of going through the illness before people finally realize, you know what, that good feeling that I get from being manic, it always leads to something painful. And not just the crash of being depressed afterwards, but quite often we commit indiscretions in manic states. There's one of the hallmark symptoms of grandiosity. You feel like you're special, that the rules don't apply to you, you're uninhibited, doing things that you wouldn't do, or even worse, doing things in public that wouldn't or shouldn't be done in public. And that often brings people into treatment. Often it's the police or family that are bringing people to treatment for that. And because that feels so good, and because of the stigma around being labeled as having a mental illness, it's unfortunate many people go through a number of cycles of mania before they finally come to the point of sort of ownership themselves, responsibility. You know, I need to take these medications because as much as I like that feeling, I think I would prefer the stability that comes from keeping my mood within a certain range.
Yeah. And I, just to say, and again, this is really like swamps, but this whole idea of mental illness and owning a gun, this is such a tough thing. I mean, when you start mixing medicine with law, making laws, especially laws that are sort of, you know, post an event, and people say, well, we're going to make this law, but, you know, I just want to say it's very complicated, but I would worry about somebody that was bipolar if that's the reason for the medicine, and that's the normal prescription for bipolar. You know, owning a gun when you're at risk for really severe depression is scary.
Yeah. I
mean, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if somebody suffers from depression or has bipolar, they really should think twice about owning a gun. And I want to be respectful of that. If they want to go hunting, and they may enjoy hunting, it may be a good thing for them to be outside and hunting. But at the same time, I mean, I think you'd want to, I don't know, just be careful. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know, you know, what the relationship is, a mother or father who's called in. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah, or even the degree of the bipolar disorder, because there are more severe ends of the spectrum. But bipolar is one of the illnesses we consider to be a severe, persistent mental illness, and the type that can get people into trouble with guns or otherwise. And you know, we probably ought to, you know, warn that neither of us are lawyers. This is a very complicated discussion, mixing medicine and politics. But there are some, you know, rules we talked about called HIPAA, the Health Information and Portability and Privacy Act, that restricts what can be disclosed, what information can be disclosed, the right settings around that. But you know, one of the clear-cut areas around this is that if you're at a serious risk of harming yourself or somebody else, that those rules of privacy are waived in order to ensure the safety of yourself and the community as well. And from what little I know, it's that sort of level, I think, that people are talking about when they talk about you know, being known or registered as having a mental illness and therefore not being able to get a gun license.
And yet, on a personal level, I would feel more comfortable if somebody told me I'm on my medicine and I am safe to hunt. And it's sort of interesting that what you're having is the opposite. I'm not going to take my medicine, so I won't be mentally ill, and therefore I can hunt. When it really, in some ways, it probably should be the other way around. I have a mental illness, but I'm on medication, and I'm okay, and I'm stable, and I'm safe to enjoy hunting. So, you know, again, that's the kind of thing that you get in a trap. You know, you can pass a law that's makes sense in one locality, it may not make sense in another locality. I mean, it may not be the appropriate way to enforce it. So,
and emotions run high on this one.
Okay, we'll stay out of it.
Exactly, I meant a good place to back out there.
All right.
So it seems to me that most people in our society struggle with depression or anxiety at some point in their life. Will they be classified as mentally ill and unable to own a gun? Will psychiatrists determine who has the right to have firearms? How will this be enforced without jeopardizing our individual right to privacy? Well, I think we have a theme tonight.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you have to be really careful about this whole idea that we all had depression or anxiety in our life. I mean, you can be anxious and not have a mental illness. I mean, you can be depressed and not have a mental illness. And, you know, to make that assumption, that's the kind of leap that goes along. And you can mentally not feel good. Like you can, just like you can be physically not feel good, but I don't think it would interfere with owning a gun. I think it would be more important for psychiatrists to determine perhaps who should not have a firearm at this time. I think that's the other way to put that. Not so much that they would say, you know, because they're not going to override the Constitution. I mean, you know, the Constitution says we have a right to bear arms. But I think they can say, well, I don't think this is a good, you know, safe thing for this person. So,
and I don't know what the framework is going to be for this, but when you talk about, especially in the state of Vermont, I think it's fairly common to many states, the idea of hospitalizing somebody involuntarily, or what we call sort of committing somebody, that there are very stringent criteria around that, that there are only certain mental illnesses that qualify for taking that kind of action, and that it has to be serious risk of harm to yourself or somebody else. And a third criterion, and these have to all three be present at the same time, is there's not a less restrictive means of keeping someone safe. You know, quite often you don't need to be in the hospital. You're able to take care of this problem in the outpatient world with adequate supports. And I would imagine, like you're saying, this is not going to be something where psychiatrists are expected to have put a stamp of approval on who can have a gun, but rather sort of a stamp of disapproval on people who shouldn't have one, which should be at the farther end of the spectrum. And I know one thing that I was impressed with in my training was one of my teachers that told us that we're all on a spectrum, a similar spectrum as far as depression, anxiety, obsessiveness, all these sort of things. And that when we're sort of too far to one end of the spectrum, that's when we might be considered to have a mental illness or not to function very well. So I'm imagining a lot of us identifying with the fact that, I get depressed sometimes, I get anxious at times. I am really on a human spectrum with people who are very ill. And there might be some fear around, is this going to impact my right to gun ownership? Am I not going to be able to hunt again? Am I not going to be able to go to the shooting range? Some things that I might enjoy doing.
And I think I'm going to repeat myself in the last question, but you never want to get to a point where somebody who needs some help, mental health help, doesn't want to get it because it will jeopardize them owning a gun and going hunting and doing things they enjoy. So I think you want to see if you can avoid that situation. And I know before the show, you and I were talking, and I read this op-ed piece somewhere that they passed a very strict gun law. I think it was Australia. I might be wrong on that. But one of the things it did was it reduced the number of deaths by suicide. I mean, drastically reduced. I don't know the exact numbers, but anyway. So I just mentioned that. I don't know why I say that, but I mean, it's just that there are some unintended benefits of stricter control, especially around the mental illness and being careful about it, about who has guns. In hindsight, when you look back on so many of these things, you can say, well, we could have identified that student, or that teacher in Colorado should have been able to tell. Well, that's hindsight.
It's a tough thing too, particularly around what I've read about suicide and doing research or trials around that. When you have an event that is so relatively rare, it's difficult, not impossible, to do any kind of research or study to determine how you might be able to sort of prevent that or to notice it ahead of time. So I think we're all wound up with that gut-wrenching feeling that I saw a sign, and that if I had known, I could have done something about it, which really mistakenly sort of assigns a sense of power to us that we don't have. We're not all knowing, we're not all powerful, and we just sort of are beating ourselves up by implying that we could have done something that might have changed that whole scenario.
And on the other side of that is that public safety. If you took a look at cars, we have to get a driver's license, we have to take eye exams, we have to register the car, we have to have an inspector, we have a safety. And this is all done under the idea that we have to make our highway safe.
Right.
Well, I think there is some level where you can say, well, we could do background checks on people. I mean, if it's not too onerous, or, we can make sure that the people who have guns are safe.
Right.
I mean, as much as you can without, going too far. But so I think there is some room there, if you will. You don't have a constitutional right to drive, right? We just say, well, it's no, but you have a right to have a drive, but you have to meet certain criteria. You have to do this and you have to do that. You have to be a certain age. So I think that there's some validity to looking at that with firearms and guns and saying, how do you want to approach this and make it safe for all of us?
Right.
Anyway, at the risk of not knowing what I'm talking about,
I was going to say we should make sure nobody quotes us as experts on this in any regard whatsoever.
All right.
And so some more of this. So this is obviously a theme for tonight. So will they take guns away from alcoholics and addicts? I'm on Suboxone, but have enjoyed hunting since I was a young boy, and I'm worried that I will have to choose between my treatment and my love of hunting.
This might be all the same person calling in. We need more people calling in.
Yeah,
different topics.
Let's get a live one here.
That's right.
Well, there's sort of an unfairness around this. when you talk about, we've always understood that addiction, first of all, addiction is addiction. So whether it's alcohol or opioids, it's still addiction. So this teasing out that there are alcoholic addicts and there are opiate addicts, no, it's all addiction. Like the AA, right? A drug is a drug is a drug. Right. Meaning it doesn't matter what your drug is, it still has that power over you. And then to separate out addiction from other mental illnesses, it's just not right. Addiction is a type of, alcoholism is a type of addiction. Addiction is a type of mental illness. But the way the laws are these days, like for example, talking about involuntary treatment, alcoholism or opiate dependency or cocaine addiction does not qualify as one of the mental illnesses that would allow us to commit somebody against their will if we thought that they were a great risk to themselves or somebody else. So we miss that first criteria of one of the defined mental illnesses. And so it gets treated differently, not just by social sort of attitudes, but also legally as well. It's not afforded the same level of concern.
Right, and if you're on Suboxone, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person or that you're a danger to society. I think one of the problems might be if you have been convicted of a felon. Right. Now, if you're convicted of a state crime, you can sometimes forfeit your right to go hunting. And if you are a felon at a federal level, the same thing applies. I don't think that being on Suboxone would automatically, at least I hope not, I pray not, that would automatically exclude you from owning a rifle or a gun to go hunting, a hunting license. Now if you were engaged in an armed robbery to buy your drugs, that's a different thing, right? You've been arrested, been convicted of that crime, then you're not allowed to own a gun. So I don't know what's going to happen, but
It's a very emotional topic. A lot of emotions play a role in addiction and addiction treatment. But again, the mere presence of the medication, whether it's Suboxone for opiate dependency, whether I'm taking Prozac for depression, that fact by itself, I hope, is not going to really play a role in this debate.
Right. And I've noticed with a couple of these last questions that one of the things you see is fear. And one was a fear about the safety of our son. This guy has a fear of loss of hunting. And I think part of that, again, and I've mentioned this before, is the stigma of mental illness. And people who are mentally ill, it's sort of tragic. Because that you're not thinking clearly. And just like addicts and alcoholics, they know they're out of control. The first step of AA or something says, I admit it. To admit to something is to know that you already know it. It isn't like somebody convinced me. Nobody ever can convince you. But the problem is that there's such a stigma against mental illness and the way people think about it, that when you try and make this big grouping, mental illness, come on now, cut it out. It's like a physical illness. There's multiple illnesses. There's different levels of severity. There's different levels of frequency. And I hate to sound like self-serving, but part of what we thought we would do when we did this was to talk more about it and not maybe destigmatize it a little bit. Make it something that people can ask about and talk about and make common sense. And again, this is one of my concerns about, when people decide to make laws, that they operate not really knowing enough. Now, they have experts come in and they listen to them and everything, and I appreciate that, but it's a lot of people already have a framework about what mental illness is. And like I said, they lose past events and they pick out things, this person or that person or that person. Statistically, I don't know this, but I would guess that the majority of violent crimes committed by guns are done by sane people.
Okay. Hopefully not sane in the moment.
Maybe not sane in the moment, but not someone officially who mentally ill. It's so.
So you try to say that the risk of these sorts of events is probably less, but the spectacular nature of these big events like Newtown, Virginia Tech, those just skew completely our ability to think rationally.
Yeah, and I think on some level, and how you protect from those other ones, you want to be very special about it. I guess, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a difficult thing, and I know in some cases you'd have to worry about malpractice, or if you violate HIPAA, you know, what happens
yeah,
if I report somebody. So I think if they took away some of that concern, that if you, and I think this is true already, if you in your own judgment thought this is the right thing to do,
Oh, right, right.
you would do it.
Absolutely. There are ways to sort of guard against that risk of malpractice to enable you to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the whole goal of that sort of thing, is to ensure that we do the right thing.
That's right. And when I worked at the hospital, you know, they would have these people come in and they would make sure they were safe to leave if they didn't want to leave. Or, I mean, we wanted them to stay, they wanted to leave, we'd have people come in and check them.
Second opinions.
Second opinion. But still, ultimately, the doctor would say, you know, I'm still not comfortable with this.
Right.
And I'm not going to discharge you.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think that's the safe way to be. And I would say that to anybody, not just mental health professionals. If you thought there was somebody out there with a gun that was unsafe or a danger to themselves or others, you should tell somebody. You should report them. I mean, if it turns out it's okay, it's okay. But, you know, it's very difficult. People have this real fear of being a rat or squealing on somebody.
Right.
That I think it's sort of, you know, in our field, we're what we call mandated reporters. That we're supposed to report any time that someone's at risk to harm somebody else or property or something like that. But I think almost all responsible citizens are mandated reporters. In other words, I think we have an obligation to each other. That, you know, if you have fear about somebody, let somebody know. I mean, it's like DSS. Sometimes, you know, people will call in about child abuse or child harm. And they always say, well, tell us the case. We'll decide. We'll investigate.
Yeah.
Maybe we will. Maybe we won't.
Yeah.
I mean, but, you know, let us know.
Right. Sometimes we get the mistake that we're actually judge and jury at the same
That's right.
time,
No,
when
you
really
just-
we're playing a role in a larger system.
right.
And we need to make this report and hand it over to people who then can make the decision. And we
Right.
all play a role in that.
And I think that's true for, I would hope for a lot of family members, because they know the person best.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, but if you're scared of the person, I mean, literally, I mean, that's a clue.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, and it doesn't hurt to let people know.
Right. Yeah. No, I read a great book called The Gift of Fear, that we should listen to our emotions. They're giving us important signals, especially in those sort of situations where we're with other people that are suspicious or concerning. And listen to that. Don't let being a nice person sway you from listening to the signals that you're getting from your brain.
And when you do that, I can't guarantee you that the person will come back and say, thank you for doing what you did, you saved my life, or you saved, and you know, that may not happen. You know, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
But I think you might have the sense, like it's hard to measure something that didn't happen.
Right.
Like if you prevented something from happening. But nonetheless, you can rest assured that you did the right thing. And there was a genuine concern. You weren't doing it out of some kind of nosiness or punishment or anything. Spite or anything else. And this is the concern I had. And I did what I thought was right.
Yeah.
And I think if you use that as your judge, you know, let other people get involved and make their decisions. So,
and somebody talk to somebody about it to explore where you come from.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
All right.
So,
well, it's not about a gun.
all right,
Here
fine.
we
So
go.
and here we go. This will cover a lot of ground. Is mental illness, especially addiction, a spiritual disease? So, Rob, what is a spiritual disease?
Yeah, spiritual disease. That's right. And I think one of the reasons is, you know, alcoholism has a long history. The way people think about it, you know, they thought about it as a moral issue.
Right.
They thought it was a social issue.
Character strength.
All kinds of things. And one of the things that they managed to do, because they wanted to take it out of the realm of it being a bad thing, morally wrong. And they said, well, it's a medical problem. It's a disease. It's an illness. And it has the three criteria. It's chronic, there's no cure, progressive, it will get worse, and eventually you'll die from it.
Right.
And when I worked with Dr. Yandel years ago, she said, you know, if anybody wants to argue about the disease model, it's almost like a politics at that moment. You know what I mean? It's about you know, what we're trying to say is that it's not a moral issue, it's not an intelligence issue, it's really an illness of the brain. It's a mental illness, and it needs to be treated as such. And one of the reasons people talk about the spiritual aspect is that for many, many years, one of the ways that people used to get better from alcoholism was AA. And AA is a spiritual. And they, you know, they literally have a chapter called The Spiritual Solution.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't say that alcoholism or drug addiction is a spiritual disease. I mean, I definitely would not say that.
Yeah. But disease for sure.
But I will tell you that I've seen people get better who develop a spiritual life.
Yeah.
I have seen people develop a new way of living. And I don't mean a religious, but I mean they're more at peace with themselves. And you'll find, well, as you know, AA is fairly successful.
Well, it's the most successful treatment we have.
Yeah.
No holds barred.
Yeah.
It is.
And so I think it's fair to say that, you know, if you thought about what this is where it gets tricky, you know, what is the spirit? You know, what is that part of us that's the spirit? You know, and there's the intellectual, there's the physical, but there is that place where, you know, if you've ever been heartbroken, if you've ever felt really sad, like, you know, empty inside, it's not physical. I mean, it's really not. It's not intellectual. It's something else. I mean, it's like your spirit. It's sick. It's soul. It's a sickness of the soul. And if you've ever felt in love, if you've ever felt really good, you know what I mean? Like you
couldn't eat.
Yeah, you just feel good about yourself. And I think a lot of addicts and alcoholics, the only time they feel good is when they're high. And that becomes almost a constant. They're either under the influence or they're in withdrawal. And over a long period of time, they don't even know how they feel. They just know that they're either high or they're not high. And that becomes almost their benchmark. Yeah. And so I think spirituality in some ways gives you another way of feeling good about yourself. I mean, without taking something. And you know, the foundation of almost all, not just AA, but anything. I think anything that says, and you can, you know, help me with this.
Sure.
I think anything that you help someone else. Yeah. You know what I mean? Anything that you do with another person, that you're not alone, that you work with somebody else, and it's helpful. I think that tends to work. I mean, you get out of yourself.
And I don't want to go too much on a tangent, but I've gotten kind of interested in sort of evolution. And how do you look at mental illness, depression, all the range of mental illnesses in that frame? And these sort of problems, illnesses, have always been there. It seems to be something that's sort of ingrained in us through our evolution. And the question is, why would those things persist? You know, why wouldn't we then say, you know, stop breeding with people who are depressed and then have depression sort of fall out of the human race? And so the idea is that it conveys some kind of benefit. And so because it conveys some kind of benefit, we will always have depression. We'll probably always have addiction. There will always be schizophrenia because they have just persisted at a certain rate throughout time. And when they look at sort of why something persists in this sort of mental illness realm, one of the things they talk about is, of course, you know, you've got to sort of reproduce. That's a big piece of it. You have to sort of protect yourself and your mate. But another important piece is what they call sort of social reciprocity. Meaning sort of the give and take between people. So depression maybe causes us to sort of pull away from others, gathers their attention, so we go to that person who's depressed and try to pull them back in. So one way of looking at this is sort of that give and take, and how do we respond to each other? And I think which is another reason why, well, one, all these mental illnesses, they're part of how we are. So I want to sort of take away that stigma of I mean, we see them as diseases, but they'll always be with us. So maybe sort of kind of lessen that stigma around that, and that why things like AA are so important, because we need to be with people, and having a social circle is really important to health, no matter what the mental illness might be.
See, that's a smart thing. See, that's my job. My job is to make him look young and smart, and I think we just pulled that off.
All right, you know. Like always, what we hope is that we were helpful to somebody out there today. So thank you so much.
And more questions, different ones. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. I thought I was rambling.